Now, how did the US dollar become the world reserve currency? For us to fully understand this, we have to go back to World War II, right before the US became the superpower of the world. Now, Great Britain was the world superpower for nearly 90 years prior to that, but because Great Britain, this was their second involvement in the World War, they took an economic hit and their national debt increased by 130% by 1930. That's around $7+ billion. That's a lot of money back in the day. So Britain, they needed goods and they needed money, right? And so did China and the Soviet Union. In 1941, when Germany invaded the USSR, President Roosevelt, he convinced Congress to, they should provide military aid to nations vital to defense of the US. Now, under the Lease Act, the US dispatched 400,000 jeeps and trucks, 14,000 airplanes, 8,000 tractors, 13,000 tanks, tons of cotton and food, and sent over $11.3 billion, which was roughly $232 billion in today's dollars, to the USSR. Now, you heard that right. US and Russia, they were good friends back in the day. Now, I think the war helped with the demand for goods and hence the boom in industrializing America. It really helped drive American economy because they were probably one of the only countries doing most of the producing and manufacturing back in the day in World War II. Now, companies like the Higgins Boat Factory in Louisiana boosted business exponentially in 1943, becoming one of the first integrated factories in the US. And this was a factory back in the South. They needed so much workers and they were making so much business that they had to do integration, right? Now, the winter of 1943, the Willow Run plant, owned by Ford Motors, this is another company that was doing good. They employed over 42,000 workers and produced one bomber plane per hour, which was a massive achievement in those times. Now, the US gold reserves increased from 2,000 tons to 20,000 tons from 1910 to 1940, which was roughly 75% of the world's gold reserve. You understand? America was rich during the World War and after. So here's the first reason why America became a superpower. In July 1944, a little over a year before World War II ended, the Bretton Woods Agreement was signed. What's the Bretton Woods Agreement? Now, 44 countries with 730 delegates agreed to set up a World Bank group and the IMF. Now, they agreed to settle international balances in US dollars, pegging their currency against the US dollar, and America agreed to back the dollar by redeemable gold at a fixed rate of $35 an ounce. Now, however, America, they kind of ran into some trouble in the 1970s as it could not fulfill its obligation to redeem dollars for gold at the official price. Meaning, whenever two countries did business in dollars, they could redeem those dollars for gold that America had at a fixed rate at $35 per ounce. So, countries would choose to use a US dollar versus their own because they could redeem that dollar for gold, right? So President Nixon ended the dollar convertibility in 1971 because I said they ran into some problems. They could not fulfill their obligation.
Accordingly, I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States.
The IMF now, it loaned millions of dollars to countries seeking to rebuild their infrastructure and economy after the war. Now, in exchange, the IMF dictates policies in that country that it loans money to ensure they make their money back. Now, in my personal opinion, that is control disguised as help. Because the IMF is known to restrict government social programs in these countries, specifically third world countries. In Jamaica, was hit by that. And anytime we borrow money from the IMF, I'm telling you, the whole country starts doing bad. No matter what they say, because we're indebted to this high interest rate, and they can control all the social policies. The second reason that gave America its dominance was that on February 14, 1945, President Roosevelt signed a deal with the Saudi king Abd al-Aziz to provide military protection against its enemies. That's after Italy had dropped several bombs in an attempt to destroy Saudi oil plants that they were mining for the US. The agreement was that the Saudis, who were digging the largest oil well at the time, would sell oil only in US dollar. And that's when the term petrodollar was coined. And the petrodollar, it basically describes the excess dollars that countries could not use after they sold oil. So basically these countries had no choice but to remove this excess dollar from the circulation in their economy. So let's jump back to 1971 when Nixon decided to stop redeeming US dollars for gold. No, he had to do this, because the UK tried to redeem $3 billion in gold, and America basically did not have it. Now, of course, the value of the dollar plummeted after Nixon's decision. OPEC was mad because their revenues plummeted as well. Now, in addition to that, the US sponsored Israel to fight against Egypt and Syria in the Arab-Israeli war.
Good evening. The Middle East war produced developments all over the world today. The oil-producing countries of the Arab world decided to use their oil as a political weapon. They will reduce oil production by 5% a month until the Israelis withdraw from occupied territories. If the Arab countries keep that pledge, it would reduce their production by almost 50% in 1 year. There were diplomatic maneuvers at the United Nations, in Washington, and in Cairo. And there is a savage and possibly decisive tank battle raging in the Sinai Desert.
OPEC just retaliated with an oil embargo on October 19, 1973, which consequently led to stagflation in the US. Even when the embargo ended in 1974, oil prices only began to drop in the US about 10 years later. That's how much the Saudis have, OPEC has power over this world. Can you imagine affecting the US economy? And probably at that time too, the oil companies in America probably they were price gouging. I guarantee they were price gouging. But to have that effect, that the oil prices began to drop 10 years later, that's a lot of power that OPEC has. Now let's pause for a second and let's think. America considers itself the greatest and most powerful nation on earth, right? Yet, OPEC placed an embargo on her, almost destroying the economy. America knows how to carry a grudge, I can tell you that. And I think they won't allow this to happen again. And I believe this is why you see this false push away from oil-driven industry into this green energy and all these talks about climate change. I personally think America wants to make OPEC look bad for the environment. But, behind the scenes, America they have boosted crude and natural gas exports in 2023 to combat OPEC's announcement of reducing worldwide exports by 1 million barrels per day. This is the height of hypocrisy. So while America is like, oh, oil is bad, they are still producing, they have boosted production of oil and their oil exports. Now, OPEC's reduction of oil, it starts in July of 2023. So you better get ready for the hike in the gas price at the pumps. So even though the Bretton Woods agreements fell apart, all 44 nations held on to the US dollar because they needed to buy oil. So I have to commend America here for making a smart move. And it wasn't just the 44 countries that pretty much held on to the dollar. Any country that wanted to buy oil had to use the US dollar. Now, this is my opinion. The country that controls the oil supply and has the greatest military threat, that country controls the world. So do you see why blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline benefits America mostly? Is it really connected now? Let it sink in for a little bit. So why is the dollar at risk of losing this enormous influence over the world? That is the million-dollar question. You see, it mostly lies in the formation of the BRICS alliance and basically Saudi Arabia considering other alternatives to use instead of the US dollar, essentially killing that deal that Roosevelt had with the Saudis. Now, BRIC stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. But there are many other nations wanting membership. But why? Why do these nations want a membership? Because of sanctions. America sanctions whoever it wants. It just did it to Russia, seizing $366 billion of Russian assets in America, essentially blocking them from using the SWIFT payment system. America has been doing this for years, and countries around the world, they just hate this. America can do this because 88% of international trade, not just oil, happens in US dollars. So basically, if Africa wants to buy military tanks from Germany, both countries will do business in US dollars because of the stability of the US dollars. Now, the BRICS countries will meet in August of this year. I think they're meeting to establish the payment system for BRICS. And eventually, I believe they will come up with their own currency, most likely crypto. Now, having this alternative means American sanctions will have no effect on countries partnered with BRICS, and the dollar will ultimately lose its dominance. Now, this is not uncommon, by the way. Every superpower loses its currency dominance every 90 plus years. Now, Ben Steele, an economist with the Council of Foreign Relations, said that sanctions are an effective tool, but we have to be careful. It's like overprescribing an effective antibiotic. It encourages development of new strains of bacteria that are resistant to that antibiotic. Now, here are the countries seeking BRICS membership as of July 2023. We have Saudi Arabia, Iran, Argentina, United Arab Emirates, Algeria, Egypt, Bahrain, Indonesia, Bangladesh, and many more are applying day by day. Usually it takes a worldwide catastrophe to usher in the new superpower and its currency. So what do you think will happen to ensure the ushering of this new superpower? Leave your comments and your suggestions below.
And we have some disturbing news from Africa. A virus outbreak in 2 African nations has put the world on guard. This too is linked to bats, and it's bringing back fears of how the pandemic began. Of course, nobody wants a repeat, and this one is proving to be deadlier. It's called the Marburg virus. It causes hemorrhagic fever, and the fatality rate is very high. The virus belongs to the Ebola family, which is why countries are worried and have begun issuing advisories. What is the Marburg virus, and how does it spread? Also, should you be worried? Here's a report.
A virus that kills half the people it infects and brings about a fever that leads to internal bleeding. Patients bleed in several parts of their body, and it's often the blood loss that takes their lives. The symptoms are unbearable. If you've been to Africa or have come in contact with somebody who has, you should watch out for these symptoms.
Personally, I believe the economy is going to crash, and there will be, just like in 2008, the elites running to grab up all the assets for dirt cheap in America. Now, I believe there will be a cyber attack. I honestly believe it. This is just my opinion. And people will lose their money in their bank accounts, right? Now, how do we protect from this? I really don't have the answers to that. I think we could invest in gold, that's one, and we could invest in cryptocurrency, right? Bitcoin right now is doing really well. I'm not a financial guru, but I know that Bitcoin, it's one of the only things that, you know, it's not monitored by the government, basically. And I know that XRPs, Ripple is like the next thing coming. They just won that suit they had against the SEC. Because I think the SEC had sued them. I basically brought them to court because of some. They said they were selling securities, something like that, right? And the SEC were like, no, we're not, you know. And so they won that suit, so now they can come back to do business. I hope Coinbase actually puts back Ripple, because Ripple, I think, is going to do well. You know what I'm saying? So look in those things, guys. Look for an alternative. Get into farming, get into buying land, and get into owning your own house as quick as possible. Because when this thing pops off, man, it's gonna be probably the biggest, even worse than the Great Depression. This will be a greater depression. It'd be terrible. So, you know, not to let you guys worry or be fearful. Keep praying. And just know that, you know, you have to be ready. You have to be ready. Until next time.